Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 171 of Album of the Day, in which today, for today's review, the artist I'm going to talk about for this review is Kentucky-based singer-songwriter who's been around for a little while under kind of sort of an underground sort of indie folk movement. Who sort of is a little different from kind of the other indie folk artists that went for a much more kind of, bizarre freak folk kind of approach. This guy goes for a much more kind of traditional alternative country approach with his music and whatnot, since he doesn't like to, be overly pretentious about his music necessarily. This artist's real name is James Toth, but his performing name, pretty much musical moniker that he goes by, is Wooden Wand. Excuse me if I'm not talking too loud in this video, because I've got a bit of a sore throat, going through kind of allergies right now. I kind of gave you that little kind of warning right there. So I'm here to review the latest Wooden Wand album that dropped earlier this year on May the 5th of 2017. The album is called Clipper Ship. And as you can see, I have the vinyl here of this album. I've owned this on CD for a little while, but really liked the album so much, and it definitely has become one of my favorites of the year. And I did end up seeing it on vinyl in a store and decided to go get it, because I hadn't seen it really anywhere else on the vinyl format. And this is a really, really good album. It's definitely one of my favorite indie folk albums of the year. And it's one that I have maybe cooled down on a little bit, but still, it's definitely one of my absolute favorite indie folk records of the year, and I definitely recommend you check it out. Of course, some really nice photos right here. This is on an independent label known as Three Lobed Recordings, a label I don't really know a whole lot about. But anyway, there's a really nice gatefold here, another nice photo. There's the track list and the liner notes and thank yous and whatnot, personnel for every song. There's 7 songs on this record, and it's kind of short. Only like about 35 minutes. That's in length, but definitely a short but sweet one. What's interesting is that it says in the liner notes that the song Sacrifical, which I'll get into later, apparently was inspired in part from Trini Dalton's short story called Scarlet Gilia from her book Baby Geisha. And anyway, there's side A, and then of course there's side B, which this does sound really nice on vinyl. Not too many noises going on or anything like that, which is kind of a typical kind of issue for most people with vinyl, but the little imperfections I don't necessarily have a problem with. Anyway, that's my vinyl copy of Clipper Ship, the new album from Wooden Wand, and I have an interesting little story of how I ended up getting a copy of this on CD beforehand. I went to North Carolina, got a tour of Yep Rock and Red Eye, met really nice people at both places, and apparently there was this one woman at Red Eye who apparently gave me a CD copy of this album early, like a few weeks before it even came out. So it was around April when I actually started getting into it. into it and stuff. And I thought it was really nice, and I definitely would like to thank her for giving me an early copy of this album, because it's become one of my favorite records of the year for sure. Sure, it was like number 7 on my favorite albums of the year so far list and whatnot. And I ended up getting this on vinyl at a really cool bookstore slash record store in Pittsburgh called Desolation Row. Of course, named after that legendary Bob Dylan song with the same name. So that's how I ended up, checking out this record and whatnot. So this record, what I do really like about this album is how, like the lyrical content on this album. Each and every song feels like these little beautiful memoirs, pretty much, that sort of have this very poetic, very powerful imagery in them, and each one of them sort of I love how it kind of like each and every song kind of tells this little like a little folk tale, pretty much. Like it's definitely the kind of thing that I think gives Aesop's fables a run for their money. I think like the stories just sound so epic and stuff like that, even if they're not incredibly wordy or like Shakespearean. Shakespearean and whatnot. Like I can tell that the stories on this album, like it's sort of a combination of like his like real life, but at the same time kind of like also definitely made up. And it's paired over some very beautiful, very like grand and very like enchanting instrumentals. And a very distinctive standout voice too. As well as featuring a variety of very talented musicians from underground, folk, and alternative country music, members of Lamb Chop, Tweedy, Wilco, Iron and Wine, and others like that. So the opening track is the lead single from the record, School's Out, and definitely right off the bat a song with definitely a very interesting, that opens up with just a very beautiful, very unique sort of melody. Like the melodies on this record are definitely very cool and very cool and instantly become memorable because of how sort of elegant and how like sweet they are on the ears. Like the song opens up with a really nice acoustic guitar melody before it is eventually elevated by other instruments, including an electric guitar with a heavy tremolo effect, as well as some keyboards and some weepy steel guitar and whatnot. Definitely very nice on there. It's on there, and the lyrics on this song definitely are like these little like lyrical curveballs that you never see coming, that still at the same time are very gorgeous and definitely leave a lasting impression on you. Like especially on the second verse where he tells the volcano to spare his only daughter, and stuff like that. And like, and talking about how its lava floats, and how we mistake it for first light. That's definitely some true poeticism right there. Like, I think the school's out thing could be like a metaphor. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but still, it definitely really works, I think. But following this is like definitely my favorite track on the record, which is Sacrifical, which features just a beautiful acoustic guitar melody that melody that right from like just the first couple of notes, it instantly becomes memorable and catchy, and it definitely is just heavenly to listen to. And this is the song I said that was part inspired by Trini Dalton a little bit. Dalton, and he sort of, and I love how it definitely focuses very much on storytelling. Like the first line talks about sort of this barefoot man that leads him up the mountainside and leaves a trail of pain behind with every step he took. And this rock asks nothing, but it knows your blood from mine. And also sort of bringing up how the sun's being shy and how the clouds look heavy, like they're duct taped to the sky. And then in the third verse, sort of him sort of walking on the street like in bare feet, and losing a flip flop, and leaving this blood for someone so he might favor him next time they meet and stuff like that. It's just definitely very powerful and very powerful, but not necessarily powerful in a super dark way. Just rather imagery but rather some kind of imagery that may be a little hard to comprehend, but definitely still very well written and whatnot, and definitely very cool. And also, once that beautiful acoustic guitar solo kicks in, I am just in heaven when I listen to it. School's Out isn't necessarily like the first single from the record. Rather, the first single is a song called Mexican Coke, which features one of the best instrumentals on the entire LP. Like acoustic guitar paired with some really nice mandolin and dobro, sort of giving it kind of that sort of alternative country, like sort of old school Wilco kind of approach, as well as kind of this clicking, clacking percussion in the background that definitely sounds really cool. That actually kind of sounds like Cash a little bit, provided by Glenn Koche, who is the percussionist for Wilco. But then eventually we also get the use of a piano in the background, as well as this weird stringed instrument called a guimbre, which is being played with a bow, it sounds like. And the lyrics definitely one of the more sort of definitely one of the most interesting songs on the record lyrically. This is one example of a song on this record where I'm not exactly sure what it's about or what the song's meaning necessarily is, but that's okay because it's the kind of thing where you don't necessarily need to get super comprehensive about it in order to find the lyrics appealing or compelling. And right off the bat from the first couple of lines of, you ask me why I carry around cash with me all the time. Don't you see all these yard sale signs? Is definitely enough to pull you in, for sure. For sure. And I also do really like the line, you can't stockpile time, because I don't remember the last time I heard somebody say that in the song. We get Mallow Toward the River, which is probably my second favorite track on the record, and I love how it's not only a storytelling song in terms of the lyrical content, but also like in terms of kind of the way that it kind of builds and kind of sort of progresses throughout instrumentally. Like I can tell that this story is somewhat, for the most part, made up, even though probably a bit of his own real life incorporated in there. The narrator sort of talking about talking about good about like passing the place where his uncle Perry's ashes are, and sort of revealing how his uncle had a cold black heart, cheated on several women, and murdered men for gold, and sort of and there's also like a line in the second verse that's sort of told from Perry's point of view, sort of telling his nephew that he's like such a foolish one and stuff like that. That and also kind of building up sort of a climax of the story of like women plotting their vengeance and the men drawing near, and like the instrumental sort of creates a little climax also. Like it starts out with just one acoustic guitar, then eventually two guitars harmonizing with each other. So then a mandolin comes in, but then once we get to the big climax, the third verse, we are also getting these very weird sort of reverby strings in the background, which is actually a Moroccan fiddle, so that's why it has kind of that sort of wobbly tone to it. It's kind of, you can't really hear it, it's like way in the background, but you definitely know it's there in this, but you obviously may get the feel for it and stuff. And this big climax is basically the people like coming upon Uncle and basically, beating him to death like a beast, sort of bringing a little bit of like kind of, darkness to the track, I think with, the somewhat kind of violent imagery, and stuff, and like how the sun set in the east while it happened, sort of bringing a bit of like a dramatic sort of optimistic undertone also. And then the fourth verse sort of reveals how like they tried to bury Uncle, but the earth refused the bones. Like every time they tried to dig in, like each time they started digging, they would always strike a stone. And following that, the song transitions into this really cool sort of transitions into kind of this weird drone sound, but then into this really cool, like, sort of funky instrumental, featuring really cool bass breakdown as well as percussion that sounds like a jump rope hitting some sort of like grass or something, maybe mallow grass. As well as the guimbre, this time just played with the fingers, just plucked, creating this sort of really cool sort of raggedy sound. The song Only One Can Love sort of sees a godlike narrator sort of telling the story here, which definitely sounds really beautiful over a very interesting melody created by acoustic guitars, as well as a really nice use of hammered dulcimer on here too. But then the song eventually transitions into the droney instrumental known as Mood Indica, which features some finger-picked acoustic guitars, as well as an Indian keyboard instrument with a fan known as a harmonium. As well as droney, as well as kind of droney atmospheric electric guitars, giving it sort of a psychedelic kind of feel that I think is really cool. But the song's final section, known as Down from Corbin, if you look in the liner notes, it has kind of a little inspiration from like Indian music because of like the use of a tabla and the harmonium still playing, as well as acoustic guitars. It sort of reminds me of a much more stripped back approach to one of the Beatles' endeavors into like Indian classical music. Like, it reminds me somewhat of maybe like Norwegian wood or something like that. Wood. Then we get into the title track, Clipper Ship, which has definitely some very beautiful vocal harmonies on it that somewhat kind of remind me of some sort of like folk music from back in the day, pretty much. It actually has a bit of a Simon and Garfunkel sort of vibe to it from the vocal harmonies. I do really like the kind of harmonized acoustic guitars on the song. Then there's also this kind of weird sort of lovely, like jagged, like sort of electric guitar sort of going around in the background, sort of panning from the left ear to the right ear. And then the middle of the song features a really beautiful, mournful cello, which I think is really nice. Nice, and this is the one song in particular that definitely has some definitely very cool sort of imaginative imagery to it that definitely makes it memorable. And then the album closes out with a reprise of the Mood Indica instrumental that was smack dab in the middle of Only One Can Love, which does sound really nice, and I think it does close out the album really well, even though I do think it is probably a little too short for me, and not too much about it that's like really that special necessarily, other than just the reprise to like close out the record and stuff like that. So that's why this track is probably my least favorite, even though it was pretty beautiful and soothing to listen to. So yeah, overall I don't really have a whole lot of complaints about this record. It's definitely a very solid record from front to back, and definitely highly recommended for those of you who are kind of tired of freak folk sort of having to be like, if you're tired of all the freak folk out there just being kind of snobby about like how the lyrics should be and how grand the instrumental has to be. But if you want something that's more kind of a traditional, simple, sort of non-pretentious alternative country approach to that sort of thing, I think Clipper Ship is definitely the record for you right here. It's beautiful, it's great, it's elegant, it's imaginative, poetic, and definitely a record that, while it is pretty short, will definitely leave a long-lasting impression on you. So I'm definitely going to give this album like an 8 out of 10. 10. For a little while, I was kind of 9 out of 10 on this. I kind of cooled down on it a little bit by like sort of toning down my score to an 8, considering all the other great records I've been listening to lately. But still definitely one that I would suggest as definitely an amazing record. So that's my review for the new Wooden Wand album, Clipper Ship. I'll see you for episode 172.